now of getting my screen capture up because the I do not know what it is doing. My screen capture up because hang on just a second, guys. This is he was having issues. I was starting to have issues. That's
Well, you're live on YouTube now.
Hi, YouTube. We'll be right with you guys in just a minute. We will be right with you. Good Lord. Number 4. All right. As long as we're on YouTube, we're in good shape. You got it shared to Facebook, so we'll keep going. So first to start off for everybody, we are going to be at the Florida Mega Minis, and that's coming up at the end of next month, or middle of next month. I can't remember the exact dates, like the 21st, 20th, and so forth. We have a couple of intensive classes that we're going to that are going to be offered at the Mega Mini. We got Keith teaching a class on intermediate xLights. That's 2 days. It's an advanced class. We have Bill Porter and Patrick working together on the beginner intensive. That's a 2-day class. And then we're myself, Barry Wiles, and I will be teaching a Mapping Like a Pro class. So if you're into mapping, that's what we will be working with. If you are new to mapping, or if you're trying to really dial in your mapping, that's what we're going to focus on. And it's only 1 day. And meals are included with those classes. If you're into LOR, which maybe you are or not, they have an intensive class too, those same 2 days. That's the first thing. The second thing I want to share with you is we have brand new gear. You can see behind me on the in the video stream, you see 2 shirts. We finally have our PPD shirts. They're in stock. You can pick them up by going to pixelprodisplays.com, click on shop, go down to the bottom of the screen where it says swag and gear, and we have 2 different shirts that you can pick from. With the gray one over my right shoulder here, and this one is the title of it's called Pixel Me This, a custom design that we had made. And then this one here is the Titans of Twinkle. This is only on the red shirt, and those are your choices. They're 2 great shirts. This one is a very comfy, soft one, and the other one's a little more thicker cotton shirt. These ones are longer. If you like tucking in your shirts and you're taller, this lighter material is really nice. That's one of my favorites. Now, the last thing I want to share before we get into the class tonight is we are having a sale just for PPD Sequence Club members. If you're a PPD Club member, you can go to the PPD website. This week, we're running a sale. The first, I believe we have it set to 20 sequences for Moana. How Far I'll Go, that's from Disney's Moana. The Pro Layout sequence for club members only is $39.99. Use code PPD Club SS. Just use that code whenever you enter that in. And to find that, just go to the PPD website and look for the Moana sequence. Choose the Pro Layout option and add it to your cart and use the coupon code that we have listed there on the page for you. So that's the code PPD Club SS. We'll go ahead now and get started with tonight's class. Tonight's class is going to be kind of I have to redo the intro. It's been a couple of years since we've brought up. Oh, thank you, Tom. Tom said the Florida Mega Minis, April 18th through the 21st. It's been a couple of years since we've attempted to review or do anything with the Spirograph Effect, and I thought it would be a good idea to revisit this, since it's been probably since 2018, since one of our first webinars that we held, that it might be important to go over some of the things that are there. It's an effect that is really not often used, or I actually don't really see it used very often in general, but it does happen to be a pretty good effect to play with. So I'm going to go through a couple things tonight. Some of it's going to lean on the side of basic and getting to know the tools and the pieces and parts of it. But the real true magic in this effect is you taking the time to sit there, play with each of the levers that are available to you. And when you do, you have no idea what it's going to do until you create it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you place the spirograph, now I'm placing the spirograph here on, if I bring up the whole house preview there, I'm going to put it on our P10 panel. It's not a super high density P10 panel. It's not this amazing, but it's a pretty nice one. It does a really good job. So I'm going to just use this here as kind of our palette or painting board, as you will. And just the basic of the Spirograph. It doesn't look like it's actually doing anything, but it really is. And at the moment, it's drawing around this circle. And there is a couple of rules. There's just one basic rule that you really need to know about the Spirograph effect before you begin using it in sliding sliders. The rule is that you always have your radius, your capital R, your radius of your outer circle always needs to be larger than the radius of your smaller circle. And when you do, you're going to have some sort of something that happens. So if we go back to the default is 20 and 10. So that gives you the basic to start it, but it doesn't do anything natively, excuse me, until you take a moment to start sliding some of these sliders. So once you know that you have to keep that slider one size larger than the radius, the capital R radius versus the smaller r radius, lowercase r radius. Once you know that, you can begin using this effect, and it can begin moving or doing something. So whenever you ever so slightly change this from the default, which is 20 by 10, and in this instance, it's changed to 14. You can see it looks like it's still going around in a circle, but almost sort of going in that circle. If we go a little bit larger, you can see it's starting to look like something that resembles a spirograph, but it really doesn't look like one. So, and this is at the setting at 25 versus 10. And I tried to keep this rather consistent so you could recreate this for yourself. Instead of me changing all the levers, I'm only trying to base all the changes so that you can go through and recreate this exact same thing by only changing one or two of the sliders. And then at the end, it will get a little more complicated at the end, because one of the things about the Spirograph effect, there's a lot of levers to play with, and you can reset an effect. But once you reset it, you lose everything that was there originally. So the hard part about the Spirograph is if you make a lot of changes and you want to just go back to something you just had, you could get confused and forget where certain levers were in order to accomplish something. So with that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to bring up my preset effects window. And one of the things that you'll see here is I have a Spirograph preset. And I don't use this much because I only have a couple listed here. But it's always good to utilize your effects preset to save them whenever you find something that's rather interesting. And on another note, that's another reason why I wanted to go through this, because Spirograph is something that I personally haven't used a lot recently, but I hadn't been using. But in the last sequence that I did, I actually kind of used it a little bit more than I normally would. And I was having fun with it, and that's what gave me the idea to do it. But it also, whenever I go through these basic videos, and I know this might be boring for some people because, oh my God, this is like this Spirograph's been in xLights version 3.0. It's been out forever. It's not exciting. The thing is that it's only exciting. It's only as exciting as you allow yourself to be creative and artistic with it. So, me going through this gives me the chance to go back to the basics and kind of restudy all of it. In this last one here, all I did was I jacked up the full capital R radius, and I jacked it up to 100. If I go ahead and slide it all around, you can see what it kind of does, and it does move in and out. It does have an interesting appeal to it. So this is something that what you want to do is you want to pay attention whenever you're seeing this, because when we get later on and we get into the value curves, you're going to find that this is probably where you're going to have a lot more fun playing with and using this effect. The next thing that you see on the slider list here is the lowercase r, the radius of the inner circle. Now, again, like I said, the default is 10 and 20, But if I just ever so slightly knock it down to 9, you can actually see it start to animate and do something. If you knock it down to 8 or 7 or 6 or something, yeah, now you've got something else going on. So I have a couple of these that I kind of preset so that you could see them, but with a small lower number and a not even changing the maximum range, you actually have some animation here, and it does look pretty cool. This one here, this is about 7 and 37 on the larger radius. And that gives you a little bit of animation if you're trying to accomplish something. And then just kind of a free for all right here. This is where they're really close, but it's large. It's working on the larger end of the radius. If you bring this down, and you can see where it's going in and out, it shrinks the size of the overall spirograph where it's working on the outside. Even when we were jacked up to out here and we were closer together, see how it keeps it still a little bit closer together in these outer curls. So those two things that as you begin to look at this and play with this, those are the two main sliders you're going to find where you have a lot of control really quickly. But keep in mind that if you ever slide the larger slider, whoop, forgot to select it. If you ever move the larger radius, the outer circle, lower than the inner circle, it's kind of funny. Why maybe it should be hard coded in xLights that those two should be locked and they should never be able to stretch that way. That's just something I thought of. So, but in any event, you can see that there's only a dot, and it's like dividing by 0. It's indefined. It's undefinable. You can't define something divided by 0. So that's probably what xLights is saying. Hey, this doesn't work. So anyway, let's roll along. Let's move on to another slider, the speed slider. Now, why did we forget about the speed slider at first? Well, basically, you have to have some sort of large radius or a small radius where you can actually see changes being made. So if you put the default slider down, or the default spirograph effect down, and you don't make any changes to it, the slider for the speed is not going to show you very much. It's just going to look like you can see it barely moving here, and it's going to show something, but it's not interesting. It just looks like a circle. So what I wanted to do was I wanted you to see, this is where you can see, like, you have your base radius at 10, which is what the default is, and then your outer radius is at 61 in this instance. And you can see that as the slider's up here on 46, because the default of the speed is, I want to say, what was it at? What was the default of that? It's at 10. The default of the speed is 10. Moving it up to 46, well, that does something. So I wanted to do another version of this where those sliders, where the two radiuses are much closer together. And now you can see that speed kind of moving along with it. Now you can slow it down if you want to, and then you can have it going really fast. I wonder if it would make sense to ask for an increased range with that. Just kind of thinking out loud. So next we have distance. So in this section, when we talk about the distance, we have a distance slider. This is our default of the spirograph. The distance is set to 30. That's the default. Distance, whenever you leave the spirograph as a basic or a default effect, the distance slider actually makes it look like it's growing or shrinking. So keep in mind that might be something useful for you if you're trying to have something bounce to the beat and using value curves, something we'll talk about down the road. But I wanted to also show this. So if I decided to give my radius, my capital R radius, a +5, so instead of 20, it's now 25. And now I have this distance set at 30. That's the default. You can see that we can change that distance by sliding it in or sliding it out. Here's an example of a little bit further apart. We'll go ahead and with the different radius. You can see how having a value curve on there later on will be rather interesting to have a little bit of fun with. But also keep in mind that I'm not messing with the other sliders for the speed or the animation that we haven't gotten to yet. Because again, there's so many sliders. If you start changing everything all at once, you really want to get the basics down. So that's all we're focusing on right here. Now, if you decide that you want to have something that's a little bit closer, where they're a little bit closer, you have the 40 and the 60 radius, and now you have your distance at about 40. Now you've got kind of an effect, if you are familiar with the sketch effect or even the tendril effect that appears to draw on the screen. This gives you a circular motion. It also gives you the kind of the movement or motion of like galaxy, where galaxy is like kind of a spiral that goes inward, or spiral that shockwaves outward. So keep in mind that this is another variant for you to use whenever you're sequencing. And here's another example of a pretty wide disbursement between the capital R and the lowercase r, the radiuses being a little bit more spread out. And you can see that that distance kind of from 30, if we went down to 30, you could see it down here. And if we move it back up, you can see it kind of zooms in. So it's an interesting way to make changes. And one of the other things I'm going to introduce to you now is something that I came up with about 5 or 6 years ago. And then I call this micro movements. It's not important to drastically change this effect to see a big change. Sometimes slightly changing this effect. And I'm using the scroll wheel on my mouse, hovering over top of the slider in Windows, and I'm just sliding it 1 or 2 or 3 notches at a time to kind of get to see what that animation or what it looks like as far as the effect being rendered over top of it. Specifically on distance, it doesn't look like it's animating. And yes, we do have the speed slider, but it's only going to continue doing this this exact direction because that's the movement that we've given it. Moving on from distance and going into the animation side, the animation slider is a way to give it a little bit more of a different life. So this is, again, your base spirograph. You start with obviously the 20 and the 10, and you have the 30 distance. And now we're going to move into the animation. By default, animation is set to 0. If we just bump the animation slightly up, and I did give the radius a little bit of a bump. I gave it from 20 to 50 or 49. Now you can see that now you have some actual growth animation, and we're only changing it by 5 points. Like it literally was set at 0. If we do a negative to the animation, and I went out a little bit further here, used a different color, and I subtracted 2 from the animation. It was 0 to -2. Now you can see a different kind of animation. And just to have a little bit of a play around it, and I decided, I'm going to play with the speed a little bit. Now the speed is generally down here. I think it's at what, 10? What is that at? Yeah, it's usually at 10. So if it were at 10, and you can see how this is kind of like this little curlicue that kind of just flies through the air, and we're only animating at a -10. We have these really close together, but we can also speed it up and see what it looks like whenever it's going pretty quick. So it has a lot of different appeals for you to begin playing with things as we kind of compound these together. Animation's a lot of fun to play with. Again, I suggest micro movements, 1, 2, 3 notches at a time. Anything more than that, it gets you this. It kind of starts spreading things out, and it may not. It may seem or appear to be kind of unruly. So whenever you make your changes to distance and animation, do micro movements. Next, we have the length slider. So just again, here's your base default setting for the spirograph. If we change the length to something that's less than the 20 base, the default 20, if we go to 3, this is, and then of course we're using something a little bigger here. If we go to let's say 30, so that's usually it's 20. 20 would be the default. 20 would be the default. Now it looks like it's going into a circle. Basically, that's what it does. And then the more that you give yourself an outer radius, you can see it start to come in and curl. And obviously, if you move up the slider, the further out it goes, now you have the curls that are going all around there. But now you're into the length. You have something less than the default, which is 20. It's at 3 right now. If we bump that up and make that a little bit larger, now it fills it in, and you can see it working it over it on itself. So the more length you give it, the less negative space you're going to have. But it's really a dainty negative space. So I mean, you still have negative space, but you can see clearly that there's some differences. So if we just look at just how the length is changed between them, and if we kind of play with the inner radius and the outer radius, that length shorter gives you that drawing. The longer gives you the more filled in look, like what it would look like filled in as a full spirograph. Now, this is where moving these two spirographs, to the two radiuses together, start to yield you something. And that length, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, it will either make it longer or shorter. Again, once you get so far down the road and it's not doing something that you think it should be doing, and I'll show you this now, you can right click and reset the effect. And what that does is that takes you right back to the default, automatically, boom, right away. So if you want to start playing with it again, then you start giving yourself a little bit more of that radius, the capital R and the lower R, give yourself a little bit more spread, and now go back to your length and see if you can't shorten it and see what you can come up with that might be interesting to you. So just something to play with on the length. And then finally, one of the sliders that's been added is the width slider. And I remember asking Keith about this, I want to say long about 2019 or maybe 2020 it was. And he told me a very interesting story because he said, yeah, I can see where or why you would want a thicker line. You'd want to be able to show that off or make it a little more bold, especially with the HD props that are available, or maybe even the virtual matrix. And so he set to work on it, and he told me that he had a hard time trying to figure it out, and his son actually helped him figure it out. And I believe, if I remember correctly, he said his son said, well, in order to make the line thicker, you're not actually making the line thicker, you're removing the space between the other lines, and you're adding less negative space to it. So it had something to do with that, and his son kind of got him to think in the way to make this work. So I always thought that story was interesting, that he actually built it in, and now we have the ability to make this line much thicker. Now, is it as thick as it can be, or does it like fill in the line the best way? Well, you be the judge. I mean, it certainly does make it bold so you can actually see it now, but sometimes overdoing it and you really can't tell what it's actually doing. So there it is. It's something that is there. If you want to thin it out a little bit, you can always come down to the layer setting box that I have on the bottom right side of your screen there, and you can blur it. You can kind of thin it out there, make it a little bit more blurry, make it a little bit more, I don't know, soften the edges, I guess you could say. So those are the main sliders that that are in the Spirograph Effect. And I just read Scott said, if R is less than, capital R is less than little r, abort. Yeah, that's about it. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of value curve goodness. And if you are familiar with what value curves are, it's a matter of a value curve. To quickly define it would be taking 2 points on the same slider and connecting them. And there's multiple ways that you can do this, but basically what we've done here on the speed slider here, I've taken this version, and you can use some of these are the default ones that are available in xLights. I just use ramp up and down. I didn't try to do anything fancy or specific, but I wanted to make a point of going from one range to another. And in this instance, we have a range of 17. So what xLights is going to do is it's going to say, hey, on the speed, I want you to go from 17 and I want you to kick it up to 33. and that's up here. And then I want you to kick it back down to 17. And so what these value curves do is it allows you to move something over a period of time and use a different variable without having to manually change this. This is automatically changing it for you to the values that you want to select. And that's, so they call this a value curve. Now, this value curve on the speed slider, you can see what it kind of does. Again, some of these things that you're going to try to do may not be anything interesting at all, period. They may not do anything interesting at all. And so it really begs the question when somebody says, well, how do you sequence? Well, this is how you sequence. When you open up and you start just randomly doing things and sliding and checking, it's very tedious to come up with some really interesting things because xLights natively doesn't do it until you tell it to do it. And so that's one of the reasons why I think the Spirograph effect is not as used as often, because it's built on the premise that you have to invest some time into selecting your radius, your capital R and your lowercase r, and then using the other sliders slightly, micro movements, as I said, and then adding in value curves whenever they're necessary. So, and again, here's what it looks like using a value curve with the speed. It's going from a lower number to a higher number, and then it comes from the higher number to the lower number, and you can see it reversing there in the direction or the speed that it's going in. I put a value curve here on the capital R. So it's going from a value, it starts at 20 is what the default is, but I'm actually starting at 34, kicking it up to 66, and then back down to 34. And you can see that it's not moving where the center would be. Now I know it's growing in the center and shrinking in the center, but it's really focusing on the outer side and adding in those extra loops that you see, because it starts at like 2 loops, grows to 3 and 4, and then shrinks back down. So that's what your value curve is actually doing for you. Here's your, on the lower scale, on the smaller end of the radius, I think I started this one, this was really basic. I went from 1 to 25 back down to 1, and I set my larger radius at 40. And you can see that just, and this goes back to exactly what I said earlier about micro movements. You can see there's some interesting versions of a spirograph in there, but they're going so quick you can't tell. And this is one of the reasons why it does take time for you to figure out, just by moving one little notch at a time, to find something that might be actually worth it to utilize. And what if you build another value curve? So like from 3 to 5 looks pretty neat. So what if we go from 3 to 5? And yeah, okay, it's interesting. But again, you have to sit there and you have to play with it. And we're also stretching this out over a longer period of time. You can always shorten this to have it go a little bit, so that value curve is only going up, down, and back again. So just one way to think about it. Now, this is on the distance. This is kind of interesting. Or I'm sorry, I have this on the animation. I have it labeled incorrectly. But wait, let me check that again. Oh, I did it on both. Sorry. Oopsie. Let me do this. We'll see what this does. So this is what it would look like if there were a value curve on the distance slider. I guess I gotta have myself in my pre-production setup. But the distance, I have it set here, and I chose a default number. The default of the distance, I think, was 30, but it starts at, I have it set to start at 67 and work its way down to 34 for distance. And so you can see it's all the way out there, but as it comes down, it's slowly shrinking everything down in size. And obviously I have these sliders set to 64 and 10. I think I did that across all of those. I think I did. No, I didn't. Next would be the animation slider. In this value curve, I did choose like a very small number to go up. I went from 0 to 3. So when it starts out, it's at 0 animation, then it clicks into 1 animation, then it clicks into 2, and then it clicks into 3. So you can see that spread over time. It's kind of notched, and it's kind of interesting. And then finally, having a value curve on the length, this makes a little bit more sense to most people, because you start with in this value curve, you can see where it starts out low at a low number, and then it works its way up to a high number. So we start at 0, and if you have a width, a length of 20 is what the default is, but to go from 0 up to 49 in this case, you can see exactly what it's doing. It starts real skinny, and then it works itself into a much thicker piece. So one thing I wanted to touch on that I don't think a lot of people really consider or put a lot of understanding into whenever they're sequencing is the scaling of some of the effects. And if I go ahead and let's put this right here. That should work. There we go. One of the things that I wanted to show you is that just because you've created a spirograph on one screen, it may appear differently, scaled differently, due to the way the prop that you put it on may look. And what that means is we're working off of the big matrix panel here. And all I've done here is I've just given myself a spread of 10 for a lowercase radius, and the uppercase radius is at 80, okay? I have it set to 30 distance, 0 animation, and I gave it the full length. I kicked it all the way up to 50. Okay, left the speed at 10, so you can see it kind of moving. You can see it sort of moving, but you can tell that in the larger P10 panel here in the center, you have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little curly cues in the middle. But over here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can barely make out this one here and barely make out this one here. Now, if we come over to the big megatree, this megatree, the definition of it is 32 strings wide by 100 tall. So this panel is a wider panel than it is taller. So in this instance, we're able to see the taller sides, but it gets a little harder to see the edges. Well, first of all, it's curving around to the back. And so second of all, it may extend out past that, just as it has done on the upper ends here of the matrix panels. So just because it looks one way, if you create it on one prop, it may look entirely different whenever you place it onto another prop. And that's relatively important, especially whenever you decide to add some width to it. You can, if you kick up the width just a little bit, just so it's a little bit more bold. I mean, we're not doing anything crazy here. We're just going a little bit more bold. I added a little bit more radius to this, or took some spread away, and I gave it a little bit more length, I think, or less length. You can see they're still all doing the same thing, but on the smaller tree here, which is only 16 strings wide by 50 tall, which is a rather original mega tree that people would have started with a few years ago, then you might not get the definition. So you may have to go back in, and you might have to click on this, and you might have to try knocking down some of that thickness and see if that does anything. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to have a good resolution on the panel, the matrix, or the megatree that you're trying to work on. And it, quite frankly, it might not need that level of definition if you're copying and pasting from one prop to another. So I figured to kind of sum this all up, I wanted to have just a little bit of fun. There's a couple different ones that I've come up with over the years. This was one of the ones that was in my preset effects. I kind of threw it on here. This one here there's 2 layers. There's one's green on the top, and it's just going crazy. And I just threw some value curves onto it, and I thought, oh, look, that looks really good. And then I did something here with this one. I changed it to white, and I changed the animation backwards so that one would go in and the other would come out. And it kind of looked good for the effect or the sequence that I looked at doing that with. But you could also, again, if you need a little bit more definition, you kick up the width on that, and it makes something interesting. I kind of did cross over the colors. It's not exactly clear what the logic is behind the colors, but if you do utilize multiple checkboxes, at least 3 colors here, you could kind of dress it up with some different colors if you wanted to. I didn't go back and do that with all of them, but I did do this for another. I had this on as a preset too, but I wanted to show you that yes, sometimes colors there can be 2 or 3 colors that you can get onto there, but it usually means that you have to collect or set it to multiple colors. Um, so that's with black. That's interesting. So just something for you to think about and something for you to kind of put back in the back of your head and kind of worry about it whenever you're trying to mess around with it. Here's another version of a shockwave or a shockwave, excuse me, a spirograph that I did. I found this. I didn't find this value curve. I was doing something with the value curve, and I liked this one, so I saved it. And it's a custom one that I created, and I just point clicked and selected a couple of points, and it kind of bounced along with the beat, along with the distance. So it brought it gave it this breathing kind of life. This has multiple colors too, so it kind of worked out pretty good. And I used a little bit of width on it to make it a little thicker. I thought it looked good. Another one that I was actually just playing with it. These last 3, I was just playing with the Spirograph Effect, trying to come up with some different things. This is a color curve. If you're not familiar with color curves, we've done a video on color curves. You can right click over top of any of the color boxes here in your xLights color palette box, and you can select some of the pre-done color curves. I have a bunch of my own in here because I've been sequencing for a couple of years, but you can grab the rainbow one that they include with xLights, and it will curve the color through the length of the effect. So and then just a couple nice settings. And then here's one I like using the transformation drop down here over in the layer setting box and adding 2 layers in and kind of just doing basic stuff with it. You can come up with a lot of great things whenever you're sequencing just by changing the direction or the rotation of something. That's usually a lot of fun for me. And then this was one that ended up becoming a this I just was playing with it, and I figured it out. And if you want to screen capture this, you're welcome to. But it kind of reminds me of Michael Stockfridgen's showstopper spinner, because it's the circles and it all looks like circles right there. So I thought that was fun. This is an interesting one to share with you guys. So if you want to take a screenshot, go ahead. That's how you build that effect. But by all means, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat if you're in the Zoom room. If you're on YouTube, huge thank you for being here. We're going to move on to the Q&A session after the class. So we appreciate you guys joining us. Facebook, if you're out there watching, thank you for being with us as well. Don't forget, we have the awesome t-shirts. Go pick one up. If you get them in the mail, if you order them by 2 p.m. during the week, we can pop them in the mail and get them out to you the same day. That's 2 p.m. Eastern time, so don't forget. And as always, if you appreciate the things that we do here at Pixel Pro Displays, consider joining the PPD Sequence Club. We do an awesome sequence each and every month for you. We give you a choice of 3 different songs each month, and it's the longest act in town. We've been doing this for over 6 years. So huge thank you to everybody that's been with us tonight. I hope this information was helpful, informative, and taught you something that maybe you didn't learn just yet here in xLights. If you have any suggestions for videos, for webinars or classes, consider putting that in the comments below. And as always, thank you. Have a wonderful evening, guys. This is Clyde and Robert, who's in the background, always quiet. Thank you so much.